Welcome to the Charge Your Voice podcast, and we're here at Exposure International Photography Festival 2024, and sitting with Zed Nelson. You're a photographer from England, published your first book in the year 2000, so you've been doing this for a long time. So how did you get your start, and where did you go with it?
I began as a kind of young photojournalist, very idealistic, covered a lot of, I suppose you'd call them conflicts or, serious sort of troubled political situations.
How did you get to that? Were you working for a newspaper?
No, I was pretty much freelance. I had quite an idealistic view of, photography being a tool for change and communication. So actually it was 1992 and I was working in a darkroom printing, and I heard a radio report about Somalia, and it was a sort of war and a famine. And at that moment, I decided to go. It had been ignored. No one was there. And in a very kind of retrospectively, probably quite stupid, naive way, I got a flight and turned up in Somalia and had a very kind of serious experience, I guess, for 3 weeks, kind of understanding the world. But that turned me on to sort of the politics of geopolitics of the things that happen behind the news. And I kind of really caught a strong bug about trying to talk about issues. But I also realized how powerless I was as an individual and, all of those problems too. Cut to later, maybe a few years later, I was in Afghanistan and I was with a colleague who got shot. And I had an interpreter who was also shot. They both survived, but they were kind of very badly injured. And at that moment, something changed where I became very frustrated with photographing and covering conflict without going sort of deep. And so I decided to look more at the West, at the problems that we have in our kind of Western countries. And that was when I did Gun Nation.
So that was the catalyst for the...
Yeah.
And you worked on that for considerable time.
Yeah, it was a 4-year project. But what I'd realized in all of these different countries, in Afghanistan, Somalia, Angola, El Salvador, all these places I'd photographed in, is that the weapons were American or Russian or Chinese or British. And they'd all been exported by, our own governments. So the reason to go to America and to do Gun Nation was to look at this country where there really was a kind of war taking place in America, 30,000 people shot and killed every year, with a huge arms industry pushing those weapons out. And so that changed the way I looked at photography as well. I realized that I could use it in a more interesting way to look at industry, look at sort of the psychology of what makes us consumers, what makes us buy guns, what makes us accept those kind of statistics. Sorry, this is all getting quite heavy in a way.
No, it's good stuff. Yeah.
But and so that project was a turning point in my work as well. I think before that it had been quite sort of traditional black and white documentary.
But it's interesting how one thing does, sounds a bit trite, one thing leads to another.
It really does, actually. I think that's a key point.
Yeah.
And you have to do one thing to get to the next.
Yeah.
I needed to...
It's always the question, how did you get to here? Well, there's always a path. This takes you, that takes you.
Yeah, the first thing I ever did in London was to photograph a demonstration against Margaret Thatcher at that time. And she'd introduced this new tax system that really taxed the poor more than the rich. And there was a kind of revolution of sorts. And I found myself in the middle of central London in Trafalgar Square. I was still a student, so I had a camera and a couple of rolls of film. And that was in a way the day I became a photographer, because I realized that I was in the middle of a historical moment.
Yeah, and you needed to record that.
Yeah. And it gave me a feeling of engagement and a voice in a way, even a tiny voice in that moment. So yeah, you're absolutely right. These sort of stepping stones are vital, and you can't miss one out because you wouldn't get to the next one.
Yeah, and you don't know who you're going to meet at some point to move you. It's like you just have to go at your own pace.
True. True.
Like if you accelerate, you might miss the opportunity you were supposed to have, or decelerate.
Exactly. I always regretted not being an assistant photographer more. I was so impatient.
Yes.
I did it for a couple of months.
Right,
I assisted this really good photographer, and I got too impatient. I wanted to be a photographer. And then 5 years later, I realized if I'd stayed with that person for another 6 months, I could have saved myself 5 years of learning, just to...
Yeah, but you don't know those 5 years of learning, they just bring you to here, don't they?
True. So that was it. So once I started with Gun Nation, things really changed for me. And the next...
In terms of, how about recognition at that point for your work? Did that change things?
Yeah, that was a kind of a landmark project in a way. People recognized it as something different because I also used photography differently. I mixed portraiture with reportage. I was shooting still life images. I was using text in the book. They were all together, and they sort of disrupted the way you read the story. Instead of it being very traditional, very kind of linear, familiar, it was unfamiliar. Why were there pictures of an emergency room spattered with blood next to a kind of carefully lit family portrait of someone's grandparents?
Well, because...
But they were holding guns, and the links were very clear.
Yeah.
But people were very uncomfortable seeing the juxtaposition of those images. So I ended up, on American TV, on Good Morning America and the Charlie Rose Show, and then I had death threats from then on for about a year. And I went to a demonstration in Dallas after a major school shooting, and I saw my own images on the placards of demonstrators that had been published in Time magazine. So these images had been published in a magazine, ended up on a demonstrator's placard. And I realized, and then I was getting death threats, and I felt like I'd tapped into an important subject that people cared about.
Yeah.
And the project was recognized as well. It won World Press Photo that year, and several other awards. And so it didn't sort of change my life in any way, but I think I was recognized as having done a serious piece of work. And the next book I did was called Love Me, and that was about the beauty industry, the global beauty industry, and how it conspires to make us all insecure and unhappy with our bodies in order to sell us products. And as you said, these stepping stones, I couldn't have done that if I hadn't done Gun Nation.
And maybe it was, you needed to swerve off in a different direction after Guns.
And in a funny way, it wasn't different. It was about industry. It was about how the commercial world...
Yeah, on the surface, you would think beauty products and guns are vastly different. Right. But when you dig into it, it's the same...
They're products.
Same algorithm or same...
And if you want to sell products to people, you have to convince them that they need them.
Yeah.
And so Love Me was also about the export of a white Western beauty ideal. How do you convince people that one generic Western look is the desired look? And if you can convince everyone around the world that that's what they need to aspire to...
You can see that look on the barber shops and the beauty shops, even here, walking down the street.
Yeah.
Someone's done a good job of it, right?
Exactly. I mean, in the project, I went to 17 different countries. In Senegal, for instance, all the beauty billboards selling, conditioner or shampoo or whatever, they're all pale-skinned, light-skinned models with straightened hair. And that's no coincidence. That's hundreds of years of conditioning.
Mm-hmm.
So that was also a really interesting project, and that ended up as a book and a traveling exhibition. And then the next book I did was about Hackney, which is where I live in London, and it was much more of a local project. Coming home, I was sick of traveling. I was sick of nearly being killed in certain places. I was sick of the beauty industry and its effect.
So it's quite nice to actually, so you could turn the lens.
I wanted to be more like a student again and kind of enjoy photography, but in a way be less political. And so I started looking at where I lived, and that was going through this amazing process of change and gentrification. So it'd been this quite sort of poor neighborhood, which suddenly was sort of
Suddenly is booming.
the ground zero of London. And then, of course, the project became about gentrification and change, and then it did get a little bit more political.
He wanted to shoot a book about home and ended up going back to
Exactly.
So, tell us how you got to here, your exhibition. What was the inspiration for the exhibition you have here this week?
So the work I have here is called the Anthropocene Illusion. So the Anthropocene is the epoch that many scientists are saying we now live in. It's a short period in our history of rapid change caused by humans on the planet. So the idea is that for millions of years, humans have existed with very little change. And in the last, say, 200 years since the Industrial Revolution, our impact on the planet has been enormous. We've divorced ourselves from nature. We've damaged the natural world to an incredible degree.
Damaging.
Yeah, I mean, it's happening. And so at that exact moment in time, what we also do is we retreat into these ever more artificial or staged managed versions of nature. We create them as a kind of illusion, which gives us some kind of, I don't know, a feeling that all is well, even though perhaps it isn't.
So just to backtrack out to come to here, you know, the patterns that led you to the three books essentially seem quite clear. What was the driver for this project, or what was the catalyst to create this?
It's, you know, often I don't exactly know why start doing something. You know, Gun Nation, I know why. I was in an ambush situation in a car. It was machine gun from all sides. And I saw real I felt terror and fear. And I saw what bullets do to the human body. And I was just sick of it all. And so I wanted to kind of do a project that stripped the glamour from guns. Love Me was more complicated. I think men are targeted by the beauty industry like never before as well. And maybe I'd felt that change in a societal way. The Anthropocene project obviously is an environmentally driven project. And I could see that we're in an important moment in our evolutionary history where we have to make decisions about our future and our behavior as a species. And the problem is with environmental journalism and photography is that it becomes stale. You know, we become so used to it that it no longer affects us. So this was a way of...
Or it's been done the same way for a lot.
Been done the same way. It becomes over familiar. And I'm not saying it's wrong. We need certain types of images, but there comes a point you think, how do you break through?
Yeah, how do you break through that wall where people looked around it a different way?
So the idea of this project was a way of looking at the way human psychology works, you know, how we shield ourselves from change. So I guess the catalyst of the project was a growing feeling of environmental concern, but also a growing feeling of what do we do and how do we change our psychology? I mean, I obviously don't have all the answers about how we're going to change as a species, but I think there are important questions about how we live, you know, as consumers, where we spend our money, which governments we support in terms of which ones have green objectives, which ones care about the environment. Even where you invest your money has a massive effect. You know, if you invest in renewable companies that have sustainable policies, you can do good just by doing that.
So speak a little bit through the mechanics of the images. Maybe pick a few of the images and talk us what your process was or where you went to get them.
I mean, I went to about 15 countries for the Anthropocene Illusion project. And I included everything from zoos and theme parks through to national parks. So these national parks in America, for instance, there's Yosemite. And people say, well, that's not artificial. That's real. You know, that's real nature. And my argument there is that it's so controlled and so stage managed. You've got roads all over it, hotels, viewing spots, picnic areas, millions of visitors who visit in their cars with the air conditioner on. taking pictures out the window. So people go there as consumers to see nature. And I support...
But you're not in nature.
Well, I mean, it's arguable whether it's nature anymore or not, but let's say it is, and it's good that it exists, and I certainly support national parks. But the danger is that you drive there and you get your kind of fix of nature, and you create an illusion that all is well, and then you return to your city and you think, I've had my moment with nature and everything's okay. So again, it feeds into this kind of illusionary concern. Then obviously there's like zoos where there's a picture in the exhibition of a chimpanzee against this intricately painted backdrop, beautifully painted, of a jungle of the foliage and trees. And this painting is really done for humans. The chimpanzee doesn't benefit by that paint on the wall.
No, it's done for the illusion that we want to create.
Yeah, we
look at.
We don't want to see an animal in a grey concrete box, which effectively it is.
Imprisoned.
We want to see at least the same animal with a beautiful painted backdrop. So it's a very crude illusion, and it works only for a few minutes if you stand there and you shuffle on and you move to the next animal exhibit. But if you stand there, as I did, for 2 days photographing that animal, all of that falls
Its
away.
Frustration starts coming through.
You really see it for what it is. And so, there was images in China. I went to Kenya. People go on safari in Kenya. Again, amazing that these animals are, in a way, allowed to exist in these protected areas, but their habitats are shrinking and becoming ever more isolated in a way.
And they're coming out for the food because that's where the trucks are.
Yeah, and so I'm not really trying to criticize any individual or any one country.
That's just your interpretation.
But there's a sense we are all it. We are all, in a way, the problem. And I suppose to some extent we can be the solution.
Do you offer any solutions to people that are interested, or or is it are you just drawing attention to it so people can think about it?
Yeah, I mean, there's no list of answers to this, and that's part of the problem, isn't it? That's why we retreat into a kind of world of illusion.
The illusion.
I think we're unsure what to do. There's a lot of humans since I was born, the number of humans on the planet has doubled, which is really extraordinary. And so that in itself is already problematic. And I don't think everybody should go around feeling utterly guilty about being alive and consuming things. Obviously, there's a need for us all to consider our behavior individually. But I really do also think that we need to start looking for kind of captains of industry and governments and leaders who are...
to help us go in the right direction.
Yeah, who are more visionary and willing to make the necessary kind of sacrifices and have ideals, And unfortunately, that's something that's not really happening. That's a problem.
Yeah,
In a funny way, at the time of most potential crisis, we're descending into this world of kind of untrue populism and so-called fake news, and no one sort of is being serious about stuff.
Yeah, it's interesting.
But again, that might not be a coincidence, So yeah, there's no bullet point list of solutions, but I do think we will face more and more just simple questions about, say, animals. Do they have a right to exist? Number one, to exist at all. Do we have a right to take away their natural habitats until there's nothing left, until they become extinct? Or do we have to start fighting to protect what's left? Does an animal have a right to not be tortured, to have a basic standard of life? I would say yes. And I think we're evolving slowly to accept those ideas, I hope.
Have you found that people come into your booth asking questions of you in that vein? How are you finding the people that are coming to visit your exhibition?
Yeah, most people are quite engaged, and it's a project that doesn't try and bang you over the head with a message.
Do you feel people are getting it when they come? And
I think if they read the introduction and
come in
set
with the right...
themselves up. Yes. I mean, sometimes I watch someone come in and they've got their phone out and they're just literally walking around filming bits of exhibitions, and then they sort of wander away. And you think, I mean, that's not going to...
It's not going to
reach them in any way.
It didn't scratch the surface.
No, but I mean, that's life, isn't it?
Yeah. So how have you enjoyed being... Your first time to Exposure?
Yeah, this is the first time.
How have you enjoyed your time here?
Yeah, I mean, I've only been here for 2 days.
It probably seems like a lot longer, though.
Yeah. And all I've done is looked at exhibitions. I mean, I literally just went outside to get some sunlight for the first time, because all the exhibitions are so interesting and there's so many of them.
Yeah.
So at first it's quite daunting because of the sheer size of it. And there's good work, you know, it's really the standard of the way it's put on, these exhibitions, is very high. So you need some time to get into it, and after the first day you feel a bit burnt out, and then, you know, you come back. And
but we do have quite a good few days.
Yeah. It's good to, I think, break it down.
Yeah, and so do you feel like you've been inspired by seeing so many other people's work, or is it leading off in different directions?
I think, you can never quantify it. Sometimes you do see something that actually profoundly affects you. You know, that's happened to me in the past at shows. Sometimes I'll just read a tiny thing and it will stay with me for a year and then turn into something, a thought or a research that becomes something else. And that's actually... I think that's an important thing. You know, we're all like, what are the answers? What do we do? But there's something about photography which is important, which is about a communication and storytelling. And I think as humans, we thrive and need stories to understand who we are, to help us make decisions.
And this is kind of like an epicenter of all of that storytelling in all of these different genres, isn't it?
Yeah, and I really... I kind of believe in that. I got quite cynical at one point. I think after the years I did as more of a photojournalist, going to these, seeing conflicts and famines and things like that, I had a period of feeling, what's the point of it all? You know, nothing changes. Maybe the work doesn't do what I think it does.
Well, thankfully you got over that, because you now come up with a new body of work that you've been able to share with us.
Yeah, I just think, you know, it's slightly more nuanced. It's thinks differently. It's also self-critical. I understand that I'm part of the thing that I'm looking at in most of these projects. So it's no longer sort of us and them, look at that culture. It's kind of us as humans.
Yeah, let's look at ourselves.
Do what we do. And I think I hope there's a kind of reason and a value in doing that. And so some of the work here, I think it does that. And it does make you think, you know, and that's ultimately all you can do, I guess, at this stage.
We appreciate you stopping by, give us a brief snapshot into a very long and fascinating life in photography. And thank you for coming and having your exhibition here.
Yeah, cheers. I'm enjoying it.
Hopefully we'll get out and about and see some of Sharjah. It's a beautiful place to be, and lovely weather.
Yeah, I hope so. Yeah, that's my next on my list.
Well, Zed, thanks very much for stopping by. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.